All right, we are live. Hello and welcome Elwin Robinson to Hot Healthy 50 Plus. Really
Thank
good
you so
to have
much.
you here. So
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm Alyce Adams. I'm a registered nurse. I'm the Kegel Queen, and Elwin Robinson is my guest today. Elwin is a health researcher. He's the founder of Genetic Insights and Feel Younger. And his focus is on how understanding your genes can help you feel younger and be healthy. Elwin specializes in bioidentical hormones, peptide therapy, nutritional science, and supporting detoxification as part of a health and wellness strategy that minimizes your genetic weaknesses and makes the most of your strengths. So just yesterday, Elwin and I met. Elwin gave me the gift of a full health review of my DNA so I could experience what this is all about and share it with you. And it was super cool. And Elwin, I've discovered, is a very knowledgeable man and really passionate about what he does to help people be healthy and feel good. So glad to have you here, Elwin. I really believe in what you're doing and really glad to get you in this group.
Thank you so much for your support and for being open to giving it a try. It was really fun going through it with you.
Yeah, it's a little weird to share your DNA, in the first place. It's a little weird, and it's a little weird to then, have it on display for somebody like that. But what a really interesting experience. So we'll talk about that a bit, but I want people to know a little bit more about you, and if you can share how you got started with all this.
Yeah, the short version. My dad was a microbiologist, a biochemist who ended up being a science teacher. My mother was an English teacher, and they were both really into health. He had organic farming operations going on back in the 1980s, and my mother had real health issues. She'd getting cancers and tumors. She had cancer 4 times throughout my life, and many more tumors. And so there was this, thread throughout my early life of, detoxification, diets, different regimes where she would get better, positive thinking, hypnosis, all kinds of stuff. She would get better, and then after a while she would kind of stop it all and get worse again, and it would come back. And so it was really imprinted on me that on a positive sense, that what you can do to make yourself healthier, but also in a negative sense, I guess, that both my parents are really very unhealthy genetically, and I kind of felt like I was cursed with those genes. So fast forward to my late 20s, my health was already very bad. It was bad enough I couldn't work. I had, maybe some people would say, chronic fatigue syndrome, not officially diagnosed, but life was a real struggle. I was always ill, weak, tired, in pain, all the rest of it. And then, no one could help me. Medical doctors, I always went to the medical doctors first. I'm not averse to mainstream medicine at all, but they were all utterly unhelpful in my case. And so I realized, well, I have to work this out for myself. And I saw some practitioners, but along the way, eventually I started getting better. And by the time I was 30, I was doing so much better that everyone around me was asking, what happened? What happened to you? And so I kept offering people help and advice based on what I'd learned. And eventually that became formalized into my business. And so I had a course on energy and detox and all kinds of stuff. And I was like, great, this is great. And then in my late 30s, 39, which is, 39, 40, which is now 3 years ago, everything failed. I had a massive crash again. I was constantly in pain around my liver, gallbladder area. I had all kinds of medical tests, CT scans, MRI, blood tests, you name it, all the rest of it. They couldn't find any issue. They couldn't find what was going on. And so again, I was back to that, oh God, I'm going to have to work it out myself again. I was in a better position. That time I went to a bunch of different practitioners because I could afford to, and saw people actually throughout the world. And again, no one was able to help. And it took a couple of years of constantly being in pain and not really being able to work a lot and all the rest of it. And then the thing that really made a difference for me is that I found this genetic testing. And I just did it on a whim. I'd already tried many other tests that people often do, you know, blood tests and stuff like that. But the promise with this was like, I'd done 23andMe like almost 10 years ago. And so I still had those results. And so they said, if you've ever done a test like that before, you can just upload your results and you can get your results straight away, like from our service. And I was like, oh, well, that's good. Because normally when you do blood tests, it's a hassle. You got to wait for weeks. So I was like, I can find out what they say straight away. So I did that. I uploaded my 23andMe results. And I was just blown away, a little bit like the experience you had yesterday, Alyce. I was just blown away at how utterly accurate it was. And it gave some really, really helpful insights about what was going on with me. I won't go into all that unless you want me to, because it was, you know, time consuming. But it was the start, and it was like, oh, this could be it. This could be it. And then, because there's so many different tests you can obviously take, and it requires the skill of a practitioner, which unfortunately I never found one who had worked it out. And then I did tests and it confirmed, this is what's going on for me. And so just a few simple adjustments helped me to not only get better from that issue I had, but I actually felt healthier than I ever had. Like I'd always had digestive problems. I'd always been underweight. I'd always been like 150 pounds as a 6'3" man, which is underweight. Yeah. And when I was really bad, I was down to 130 pounds. I was like, it wasn't just pain. I was wasting away. And so as a result of that, within a few months of applying what I'd learned, I'd gone up to, 170 pounds. Now I've stabilized at 180 pounds without any fat that we can see. So I guess it's muscle, but I didn't do any, weight training. I didn't do any of the things. All I did is sorted out my digestion and my stress levels and my levels of toxicity, which it helped guide me. So as a result of that, I created genetic insights and also feel younger. And the idea of feel younger is basically like, it's not about longevity to me, because who wants to live to be 120, 150 or whatever, if you have the lifestyle of, a 90-year-old. I mean, I used to work in a retirement home and it was a retirement home, not a nursing home. And the average age there was like 88 years old. And these were like the healthiest you could possibly be, right? They didn't require full-time nursing care and all the rest of it. It's such an advanced age. But I was like, it sucks being old. I know that there's wisdom that can be gained from it and all the rest of it, but it's a severe amount of limitation. And so but I realized, back a couple of years ago, I was living like an old person. I could barely leave the house, I had constant kind of anxiety and fearfulness and I was starting to waste away, not be able to digest anything, all these signs of advanced aging. And so, yeah, I became really committed to, first of all, sharing with people how the genetics can help, but second of all, helping people to feel younger, no matter what their age is, along the way, I realized, and you mentioned earlier about hormones and peptides, I realized that hormones are a big part of actually feeling younger. And so doing hormonal interventions has helped me, not steroids, not testosterone, but other things like thyroid. So that's really helped me. I see that it helps many other people. So that is the reason why, I specifically focus on that.
So you had a big revelation, and what a journey that's been. That to be so disabled, really, and
yeah, disabled would be the word. And it was bad enough that I definitely considered suicide a few times, and it wasn't because, I don't want to claim that my suffering was so great. It was more like I just couldn't see a way out. As I said, I tried everything. I'd seen so many people and no one could help. And I just felt like, and I felt so bad because it was neurological issues, not just physical ones. And it was just like, it's not that the suffering is so bad. It's more just, I don't see how I'm ever going to get better. Right. And so finding this stuff, it was such a revelation to me that, yeah, that's why I have to share it.
Wow. That's cool. That's cool. So clearly, genetic testing would have a role for anyone who's kind of wondering what the heck is going on with their health, which was your situation. And what about people who, like me, who are like doing pretty well. But there's always room to grow and learn and optimize. So say a little bit more about the role of genetic testing for somebody who's doing all right, especially what if somebody who's, mostly if you figure somebody by the time they're 70, say, we have a lot of healthy 60 plus year olds here in this group. And what if somebody's 70 already? They figure like if something's going to show up, it probably already has. What am I going to learn from my DNA that I haven't just observed and lived in 70 years? What role could genetic testing play for people like that or people like me?
Okay, that's a great question. I've got a couple of answers. So first of all, you're much better doing it in the position you're in than the position I was in. This is not first aid. This is not emergency. This is more preventative, is a much better attitude to take to it. The interesting thing to me that I want to point out, Alyce, is that when I took my 23andMe DNA swab back in 2013, I had none of the health challenges, which I ended up having in 2020 when I got those DNA test results. And yet the DNA test results predicted that I would have all of those things, even though I didn't have them yet, right? So that was the thing that was really, really convincing to me, because part of us, the non-logical part of our brain, thinks, oh, maybe somehow it can pick up on the fact we've already got these issues in the saliva or something like that. But it's like, no, I took the saliva way before I had any of those issues. So that's really the thing that makes me the most excited. I didn't really explain that very clearly. It's not necessarily helping people like me who are already struggling and desperate. It's actually preventing people from getting into that situation in the first place, because that is the main thing that I thought. I was like, if only I'd have had these, because, we tell you a risk score, right, which is your percentage chance of having an issue, but we also give you recommendations, and the recommendations are based on your genetics, and they're listed in order of priority depending on your genetics. So people tend to get similar lists, but it's the order of what's important that varies gene by gene. And so I would say, that was the main impetus to me, that I wanted to make it available to people before they had issues. Now, to address what you said about the age issue, here's how I look at it. Every person has a kind of point of level of health or vitality, maybe what they call chi or prana, right, in the Eastern systems, that they can get to where they won't have any health problems. And everyone could have that depleted to a degree by maybe infection, exhaustion, stress, trauma. All of these kind of factors can kind of knock us down, and they can get us to a place where we have low enough energy that we can get some kind of health issue. Now, the interesting thing is, it isn't always what we consider a physical health issue. It may be a mental health issue. And we have, reports and collections on that as well. So you might meet some people, for instance, who are like, oh, I never get sick, I never get a cold, but they're very depressed, or they're full of anxiety, or they have ADD or something like that. And so in that case, I would say it's just the inflammation is showing up in their brain or in their endocrine glands, as opposed to showing up, and affecting their immune system or their respiratory system or whatever. But it will show up somewhere. And so that's that's not how mainstream Western medicine thinks of things. They think of things much more like things show up out of the blue and you have to treat them as an isolated thing. But, and I think that, the genetic insights is 100% based on Western science medicine. As I said to you yesterday, Alyce, like sometimes I have to explain, look, we don't have any recommendations in there that are not 100% FDA approved and endorsed and all the rest of it. Sometimes I have to recommend extra things for that reason. So it's 100% based on that. But the underlying thing to understand, I think, is that we all have weak spots, and it will show up. And if we keep ourselves as super healthy, then none of those weak spots may be an issue, or maybe some of them might be a little bit of an issue. But it's knowing what the weakest links for us are. right? And so if we're starting to get a bit stressed and tired and run down, then maybe it's going to show up as a sinus infection. Maybe it's going to show up as a migraine. Maybe it's going to show up as eczema, or maybe it's going to show up as this, or maybe it's going to show up as high cholesterol or something like that, or maybe it's going to show up as the deficiency, or maybe it's, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but it's like knowing where it will show up when you're starting to get a bit run down is super helpful. And then the other thing is super helpful is to stop you being run down in the first place, is to find out what nutrients that you need, right? Nutrients are the essential building blocks of our body. And some of us just need way more of some nutrients than others. And discovering that can also predict and prevent a lot of issues. Now, let's say someone's watching this and they literally are perfect. They have absolutely no issues, mental, physical, of any kind. In that case, it's still really just helpful to understand why maybe you've had issues in the past, and how to prevent them coming back again.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue, talking about nutrition. I want to talk a little bit about my results and kind of, one of the things, the very first one, I think, on the list, for people who haven't seen this, that shows up with your kind of most extreme results on the top. And the very first one for me was high potential. It's all potential,
it's a risk.
It was parts of it were so accurate that I forgot, that we were talking about genetic potential rather than like lab tests or something. But the very first thing for me was the potential for high bilirubin, which is, as you know, Elwin, of course, it's the yellow pigment that it causes jaundice. That's what, like newborns who get jaundice, it's because they have too much of this. It's made from red blood cells breaking down. People with liver issues get jaundice, and it turns people yellow a little bit, or a lot if it's really extreme. But I have always had a yellow toned skin, and for years, and people ask me like, oh, you must eat a lot of carrots or something. I'm like, no, just kind of yellow. And I saw this thing, potential for high bilirubin, and it was like, whoa, crazy. And so for me, it was not only this kind of like, wow, that explains something I didn't know was happening in my body, but it also then pointed towards something that I didn't know was happening that maybe isn't quite as healthy as I want to be. So that was very, very interesting.
Yes, we also do for all common lab markers. So cholesterol, hemoglobin, red blood cell, all the hormones, insulin, estrogen, whatever. We will tell you, like, based on your genetics, do we expect you to be in the middle of the range, or maybe do we expect you to be high in the range or low in the range? And so in your case, you were high in the range for bilirubin. And when we looked at the nutrients, we actually worked out maybe a reason why for that, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing that to you and me, we knew where we were going with that. To everybody else, that seemed like a tangent. But what I was saying as a segue is what showed up in my results. One of the most prominent things, folks, was I apparently am a person who has higher than average needs for multiple nutrients, like a lot of them, which who knew? I didn't know that was even really a thing, especially. I guess I could have guessed if I'd thought about it, but like vitamin C was one of them. I can't even remember what they all were.
There was calcium and vitamin K. And whenever I see those two together, I always think the person's going to love dairy, which you said that you do enjoy it.
And a risk, and then the next layer I'm thinking is like, okay, if I have higher than usual needs for vitamin C and calcium and vitamin K, I better start amping those up to protect my bones.
Yes.
So it's very interesting, this whole window. This was answering questions I didn't even know could be asked. And that was very interesting and really valuable. Like, I'm going to modify the way I eat. I'm going to modify the way that I supplement, based on knowing these things. And that's enormous. I mean, this could save me a lot of trouble down the road, especially, my gosh, if I can keep my bones strong preventively now at 53 by making sure I get my nutrients. Like, that's a huge deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And choline was one for you. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but that's essential for memory, which is something often that people struggle with as they do get older. But also essential for liver health, which goes back to the thing that we said earlier about bilirubin.
The bilirubin, yeah.
And it's quite hard. If you don't have dairy, it's hard to get enough calcium in your diet. If you don't have eggs, it's quite hard to get enough choline in your diet. And that's if you need a normal amount of those things. But when you need an elevated amount of those things, and so maybe you should explain like what this is based on. Like, shall I do a super simple science kind of explanation on this?
Please do.
So
we don't want to get too much in the weeds, but
no, I'll try and keep it to 60 seconds. Because, you know, most people, they might be feeling skeptical. Well, how would you know that? How could you know that, right? And so basically, there are all these little genetic mutations that we have, right? And these affect all kinds of things like our eye color, our hair color, the color of our skin, our average heart rate and all the rest of it, like things that we might be aware of. But it also affects all these other little areas. So these are called SNPs, and they're basically like these little variations and mutations. And they're just, if you have, basically a DNA is like a sequence of letters, and it's just, you have one letter difference. That's what a SNP is, just one. But that one letter difference may mean that you have a different eye color, or that one letter difference may mean your body's not very efficient with calcium. And so you need a lot more than the average person. Or you might have a letter difference that means actually your body is really efficient with calcium. And so you need less than the average person, right? So that's all we're talking about here. It's being able to see these little variations and being able to see like these massively important things from it.
Well, and what a difference too. I mean, if you think about, say, calcium, you know, this is a thing a lot of people supplement because, like, many people, women over 50 especially, are told you need to supplement calcium. It's just what we do, right? Mm-hmm. But for some, perhaps that would, too much calcium could cause problems. And if you were a person who maybe you genetically were predisposed to need less calcium, maybe you would need to have blood tests or something to figure out whether and how much. Maybe I don't know a lot.
Calcium's tricky. A blood test won't tell you how much you need, but what you can see is the calcification of tissues. So this is the calcium score that they do to predict cardiovascular disease, as an example of that. But yeah, you can definitely have too much calcium. It can build up in your brain, which is the plaque, which can cause Alzheimer's disease. It can build up in your cardiovascular system and lead to atherosclerosis and even, heart disease. And so with calcium, you need vitamin K2. And that's, you and I have something in common, Alyce, which is we both need higher amounts of calcium and vitamin K2. Mm-hmm. So if you just have a lot, if you have a lot of calcium, but you don't have the K2, then it could start building up in places you don't want it. So yeah, it's really great to get a complete picture of what you need, as opposed to reading some random magazine article or Facebook post, or even some random doctor recommendation who just recommends calcium to all women over a certain age without, going into the details.
Yeah. And it really made me think, this is not only is there useful information about, me supplementing, like I can add B vitamins without too much risk. I can increase my B vitamins or just make sure I get them or whatever. Mm-hmm. But also certain lab tests that might be especially helpful, can point toward that. If I can't even remember what I had like this, really glad I have written records of it because there was a lot of information. But, something that's, if there's a susceptibility to something, maybe you need to check with your doctor, like, let's add that to my labs this year to make sure that you're following something a little more closely than somebody else might.
Absolutely. And I do, you know, when we went through that, a lot of the time I didn't say, oh, you should just start doing this. I said, you should test for it. Right, Alyce? Because this is not a diagnostic tool. I just want to be clear. Right. It indicates a tendency, but it's always better to test. Now, in the case of maybe taking more K2 or more calcium, there's really very little downside of taking more of those things, you know, as long as you're taking a reasonable amount, like all the B vitamins as well are recommended for you, for instance. These are all vitamin C. These are very safe to supplement, and so I'm happy to recommend them. But anything where it is possible you could have too much, like even iron, the mineral iron, it's very possible to have too much as well as too little. I always do recommend people test. So this is like a very cost-effective, affordable starting place to work out what you may need. But sometimes if it's a completely harmless thing, then you can just do it. But sometimes it's kind of pointing to where further testing is needed.
Really interesting. So women, by the way, audience, folks here, if you want to put something in the comments, if you have a question for Elwin, go ahead and type it in. What about, you know, women here? This is a group of women over 50. Many women who are here with me are, you know, in conversation with me about their pelvic health. A lot of women have questions about estrogen, hormones. Generally, women are dealing with pelvic health issues like urinary incontinence and pelvic organ prolapse. So say a little bit more about why hormones are a focus for you, and if you have any comments about how genes can help women ask the right questions or help inform maybe treatment choices around hormones, especially for older women after menopause.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've just given the example of nutrients, which is a bit easier to understand because everyone knows that they need calcium and stuff like that. But the same is actually true for all the hormones. So some people will tend to have more of a particular hormone. Some people tend to have less. And to be honest, most of them are in the middle. If I could make any change to our own system, it would probably be to refine that and like change the reference range to be less broad for what is considered optimal. So, you know, hopefully we'll get to that at some point. But anyway, so if you have, let's say you're concerned about a particular issue like insulin with blood sugar, or you're concerned about thyroids because maybe, you know, you have this really struggle to lose weight and you feel cold all the time, and you have dry skin, constipation, that kind of thing. Or maybe you have, you know, you said a lot of women listen to this are menopausal, but maybe, you know, if you're still menstruating, if you have a lot of issues around that, then you might suspect that your progesterone is low. If you have no sex drive, then you might consider that your testosterone is low. If, as a woman, if you have high levels of stress, if you feel easily stressed, you may consider that your cortisol levels are high. So now, these are all things that obviously can be tested for to see what they are, but tests for these things are not foolproof either because, of course, hormones fluctuate throughout the day, throughout the month for women when they're still menstruating, depending on circumstances, right? So if you have a very stressful day, your cortisol is going to be significantly higher than if you don't. And if you have a big carb meal, your insulin is going to be a lot more spiked than if you don't. So another thing that you can do, and I'm not against blood tests, I think it's great to test all those things, but another thing you can do is look at your genetic tendency for all of these different things. And it can be extremely helpful to do so, to have clues about what's going on for you. So I'll give you an example for myself, because I'm always happy to, you know, share myself rather than even my, I don't share clients' information, even if they give permission. Usually I'm wary to do it, but certainly not without. I have a tendency towards high cortisol. In fact, of all the people's results I've seen, I'm the only one so far I've seen who has a tendency to high cortisol. And I also have a tendency to low levels of oxytocin. So cortisol is a stress hormone. Oxytocin is a hormone, they call it the love hormone. Both a mother and child get flooded at the time of birth. But I actually, like, you'll see if you Google oxytocin these days, they talk about the dark side of love hormone. It doesn't always make you loving. But what it does always do is it makes you feel satisfied. So, and oxytocin is actually a peptide that you can take as well, exogenously. And the off-label usage is for addiction, because when you take it, you feel much less desire to take a drug. You feel much less desire to overeat, because you just feel satisfied. So it turns out that it's not so much that it makes you loving, it's that it makes you feel loved. So it kind of gets rid of that feeling of emptiness inside. Anyway, if you have a natural predisposition to not feel satisfied, and if you have a natural predisposition to have high cortisol, as I do, you will tend to run around doing a lot of stuff without ever feeling satisfied, and probably engage in a bunch of addictive behavior, because you're trying to fill that emptiness inside of you. All right. So understanding that about myself has and another example is a high tendency for cannabis addiction. And this is due to low levels of natural endocannabinoids, because your body produces its own chemicals that make you feel like cannabis does. And the people who are most drawn to cannabis are generally the people who do not make enough of their own. And so that's what makes them so tempted. I doubt many people watching this use cannabis, but maybe they use CBD, right, which has some benefits, definitely anti-inflammatory and all the rest of it. And so just understanding that about myself, and so I didn't have any tendency for hypothyroidism, but I have hypothyroidism. And the reason why I have it is because of that tendency. Because if you are constantly running on stress and not feeling satisfied, you're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing until you collapse, which is, what happens with the thyroid gland. It stops being able to make enough energy because you've pushed it too hard. And then you start to struggle, and your immune system struggles and your energy struggles and all the rest of it. So it's just an example from my life. So that's helpful to understand at any age. I've had clients come back at, 80 something, tell me, oh my God, I've been looking my whole life to try and understand why I am the way I am. And this is such a big thing. I mean, it's very helpful to see what risk tendencies you have, and it's very helpful to get recommendations. But the other aspect of this, which is hard to really convey, but which is super important, I feel, is it allows you to have a compassion and understanding for yourself as you are. Because I always used to compare myself to other people and be like, God, I wish I was more easygoing like them. I wish I was more relaxed like them. I wish I wasn't so uptight, and there's good sides to it, right? Like I'm more whatever, but
right.
And so now I can go, so there's a downside, but there's an upside to having high cortisol, which you tend to have a lot of energy. And there's an upside even to having low oxytocin, which means that generally you're full of motivation, right? And ambition. There's an upside to everything pretty much if you know that it's there. Now, I'm not saying you don't want to necessarily balance those things, but I'm saying just understanding I am the way I am, and that's okay. And especially if you do this for yourself and a partner or a family member or something like that, or an adult child, and you can start to understand the differences between you. It's been immeasurably helpful for my wife and I, my business partner, or several business partners and I, like, oh, okay, we can just like respect and understand, that we have different capacities, different tendencies, and that's okay. So yes, very helpful to point to what might be worth testing and optimizing, but also to some degree just to, accept and love yourself as you are, and realize that that's great as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the looking at the so many components driving personality too. We were started talking about physical health and the hormones in the context of there, but of course our mental functioning, it's happening in a body. It's we got cells and chemicals going on. That's what's happening. And in addition to all of those or hormonal components of behavior and personality, there's also you looked at the big 5 personality traits, and
yes,
that's we all know anyone who's I remember being much younger, like probably as a child myself or a teenager, and really kind of believing in nurture a lot more than I do now.
Me too.
But if you've ever seen babies, or, my dad used to always talk about how my sisters and I, who we all look very, very much alike, very, very much like frighteningly similar. But he used to talk about how we came out of the womb completely different personalities.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I had my own child, I just have one, so I couldn't compare, but there's a lot going on with personality that people are born with. And to see some of that in the genes is amazing. And how, I know I've read, I can't remember if this is in the analysis or not, but how there's a certain percentage of happiness you're kind of born with, and then you can adjust your happiness by another percentage, but other traits are like that too.
Yes. Yep. That's in the reports. Yeah. So whether you're an extrovert, whether you're agreeable, absolutely, even whether you're happy. Now, obviously, if our happiness report says you tend to not be happy, that doesn't mean you're doomed. It's validation for you. Yes, it is more difficult for you than other people. And you can go, at last I can have that validated. Okay. And now I can do what's necessary to make myself happy or happier. But I can also accept it's just not as easy for me as other people. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting stuff. It's like a combination of, I don't know, it's like a much better version of taking some online quiz, where you like get your type, and except this is actually like really means something.
The problem with all of those tests is they just feed back to you what you just told them. So I've seen very delusional people say, how, I don't know,
I'm so flexible. Or
So this is this has zero bias. It's just reading you like like your code, right? Did you want me to show them what it looks like? Just
let's see that.
So I'll just share. These are my own results. This is not a test. So we talked about nutrients earlier, so you can see. Is that visible, Alyce?
Yes, I'm seeing that.
Okay, so this is for me, right? Like I said, I also have an increased need for calcium and K2, just like you do. And that's been very important to know. And I also have a tendency to osteoporosis. So I'm very glad to have discovered that earlier. Okay. And I don't think that's a coincidence. We haven't been able to fully map that yet, like to connect all the dots. We're working on that. We'll get there eventually. But I see these patterns over and over again. Increased need for lysine. That's an amino acid that when you're low at it, you're more likely to have viral outbreaks. So, and
people use it to prevent a herpes outbreak, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. But all viruses, I would say. Now, here's the crazy thing about this, Alyce. After I saw these results, I did something called a NutriVal, which is a very broad spectrum test of every nutrient and how much of it you need, including amino acids, including essential fats. And it told me that I was low in lysine, told me that I was low in vitamin E. It didn't test for K2 or calcium. It told me I was low in glycine. It told me I was low in glutamine. So yeah, it showed up some of them and it just didn't test for the other ones. So the only one that I didn't have low was tryptophan, even though I had increased need. But I was taking 5-HTP. So I know that's a case, that's like an anecdote of one person, but like I was just blown away, like literally the nutrients that it says that I'm likely to be low on, I actually am low on according to the blood test. And then as well, so a bunch of them are just like a typical need. So that's an example of what it looks like with the nutrients. And then we could show the hormones. We just talked about hormones, just as another example. And so these are currently sorted by risk.
Again, it's so hard to remember looking at this, that this is about DNA tendencies. It's not about like a snapshot of what's happening now.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So let's see. So with hormones, I've kind of put in the hormones and then also some of the issues that show up with hormones, like sleep quality being low is a lack of melatonin. So I put that in there. Yeah, you can see a lot of them. I have that tendency to It's not just bad news, right? You can see I'm actually less likely to have a low mood, which is what we have to call depression.
Right.
So not a genetic tendency to depression, good levels of testosterone, so that's good. Typical likelihood of insulin resistance. Now, I just want to say, I still developed insulin resistance because of my diet. And this is another important point. Just because you don't have the genetic tendency for a problem doesn't guarantee that you don't have it. Because you could have it for non-genetic reasons. It's the nature versus nurture thing that you said earlier, right? So obviously one of the reasons why people develop that issue is because of, overdoing it with carbohydrates, maybe omega-6, overdoing it with omega-6 oils like we talked about yesterday, various other factors like that. But high levels of SHBG, that's always accurate. So I always have high testosterone in my reports, very high, but then I have high SHBG as well, which means that the free testosterone is actually normal. So again, looking at that for a while, I was like, how do I fix that? How do I reduce the SHBG? And then eventually I was like, all the information I could find is that having high SHBG is actually good in a lot of ways. It's very protective for a lot of health issues. It just reduces how much free testosterone there is. So in the end, I was like, you know what? I have a genetic tendency for it to be high. It says that it's good for you for it to be high. I'm not going to worry about it. But yeah, that was very helpful.
Interesting.
Is there any other ones we want to show as an example? I don't know.
Let's look just quickly at weight loss, actually.
Okay. Yeah, so this was an interesting one for me because as I said, I had been underweight my whole life, right? And there's some little clues to that, like I have a tendency for a higher metabolic rate, which goes hand in hand with having that high cortisol that I said earlier. Like I said, I'm like a go kind of person. But when it actually came to being overweight, I have a typical likelihood. So I don't have a tendency to be overweight or underweight. And when I first saw that in 2021, after having been underweight my whole life, Alyce, I must admit, I thought that was not accurate. And then I sorted out my digestion and suddenly I became a normal weight. And I was like, interesting. So I had this belief, and this goes back to what you said, like, what can someone learn if they've already lived a lot of their life? I mean, I had lived 40 years with everyone telling me that I was skinny and that's just the way I was. And my dad was skinny and, maybe it's just the way it is. But actually, it turns out that I'm not genetically skinny at all. In fact, my mother wasn't skinny at all, right? My dad was, my mother wasn't. So I'm kind of in the middle, which is actually what's ended up being the case. So that's, interesting to know. So obviously I don't have a lot of markers here that could indicate, that could lead to being overweight. But if someone has a low metabolic rate, that will absolutely do it. If someone has a high tendency to stress, they're more likely to overeat. That can do it.
Trauma, that's interesting to see that in there. And that's your genetic resilience.
You've actually explained it better than I usually do. Yes, it's your genetic resilience, the perfect way of putting it. Obviously, it can't predict if you'll have trauma, but it's how well you deal with trauma. Some people are haunted for their whole lives by something relatively small. Some people are not bothered by even, horrific things happening. So this is the likelihood of that. I put that in there because a lot of people do put on weight as a response to trauma, especially sexual abuse trauma. So I thought that is something that is absolutely worth considering. And then, of course, there's practical stuff, right? Like the dietary protein, your level of saturated fat, your level of carbohydrate that you can handle. There's 3 basic carbohydrate types. We have the farmer, the hunter-gatherer, and the in-between. And so the farmer type can handle carbohydrates well, so long as they're healthy. The hunter-gatherer type cannot handle carbohydrates well, even if they're healthy. They're always going to struggle with it because they have those different genes. And so they're always going to do better with a more ketogenic diet. And then there's the people who are in between, which is me. So I can handle carbohydrates, but only complex ones. Some people can handle even a lot of simple carbohydrates if they are what we call the farmer type. How well we do with fat, like I can have loads of fat without putting on weight. And sure enough here, better response dietary fat. For some people, if they're on the opposite end of that scale, as soon as they eat fat, it'll make them put on weight. this is such a big revelation to me because I've been immersed in this alternative health world or natural health world for so many years, and you hear so many conflicting opinions about what you should eat in general and then what you should eat specifically to lose weight. And this to me was the real resolution to that, because it's like, it depends. You know, you hear the keto carnivore people saying, no, saturated fat is great for you. Well, that may be true unless it's not. You know, or the keto people say, you know, you should have most of your calories from fat. That's true unless it's not. Or, you know, maybe the Atkins people say you should have a lot from, you know, protein as well. Well, that's true unless it's not, unless you have an issue with protein, right? Unless your body struggles to break it down. So, you know, maybe you're fruitarian, kind of high carb people say that's the way to go. And for some people it is. That's the crazy thing looking at this, you know? So, and for some people, it's nothing to do with diet. It's the fact they have an underactive thyroid, or it's the fact they tend to have high blood sugar, which then means that they're, you know, they have high insulin, which means that their blood sugar keeps crashing, which means that they're going to eat a lot more often. So, you know, there's all these different factors, and then there's hormonal factors, right? For men, low testosterone will tend to make them gain weight. For women, actually men and women by the time they get 40 plus. High estrogen is the main thing that will lead to weight gain. Basically, the two things that lead to weight gain hormonally primarily are estrogen and insulin. Estrogen makes you put on weight, especially around the chest and around the hips and thighs. Insulin makes you put on weight more around the midsection. And if you have both high, they tend to go together. When you have high estrogen, you tend to have high insulin as well. They're both stress chemicals from my point of view. So they go, when you're stressed, you tend to have basically the pathways that hormone conversions go down will tend to mean they're creating more estrogen, they're creating more cortisol, and then they're creating more insulin in response to the blood sugar being imbalanced. And so that's really crucial to know. And especially if you have a tendency to high estrogen, or if you have a tendency to low progesterone, which I'm not quite sure what that is, but say somewhere, then that will mean that it's really, really hard to lose weight, even if you're doing everything else right. So again, this is not diagnostic, right? I mean, but it's a starting place, right?
It shows you how to ask maybe some effective questions in a way that you hadn't before. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yep.
Fascinating. That is really, really interesting stuff. So let's, I'm not seeing questions for you. So let's talk about, I have one more question, and then I want to talk about, you know, where people can find you, and, you know, what they're, what they can, how they can participate in this if they want. So, what's one mistake that people are making regarding genes and their health that you wish everyone would do differently?
It's a great question. On the most basic level, it's kind of relates to what you said earlier, which is, well, I guess the fundamental answer is making a lot of assumptions without any actual knowledge, right? So I gave an example for me, you know, I assumed that being skinny must be just the way I am because of my genes. Turned out that wasn't true at all, right? But that's what I, you know, believed. So, but I feel like the main mistake that I see people make, at least before they get to my reports, is one of two things. Either they believe that genes have no impact, and that tends to be more the people in the world that I love, which is like the personal development world, a lot of the natural health world, because we like to believe that we can control our own destiny, that we can create our own reality, that we can, you know, all of those kind of cliches. And so the idea that there's this stuff set in stone that you have no control over kind of rankles at us. And so we like to pretend, no, that's not true, right? I can achieve anything. I can do anything. And then the other side of that, people who are completely different personality-wise, they may be more like thinking in terms of fatalism, right? This is just the way that I am. You know, my father had he had a heart attack. My grandfather had a heart attack. I'm probably going to have a heart attack, right? And so and I really would encourage anyone who has that latter belief to consider carefully before signing up for something like this, because you have to be open to the fact that this can change, right? So
these are tendencies, they're not facts.
Exactly. And the proof of that is the fact that we are legally allowed to give recommendations, right? If it were a guarantee, what will be the point of a recommendation? The reason we can legally give recommendations is because there is scientific evidence, significant amount of scientific evidence, that every recommendation that we make really helps, not just for that issue, but for your specific genes, right? So the research has been done on that. The testing has been done on that. So I would say, in either case, we're disproving the beliefs of both camps, right? We're disproving the camp of I can be whatever I want to be, there's no limitations. And we're disproving the people who are like, oh, I'm just stuck the way I am, there's nothing I can do about it. It's like, so this is for people who are open to a little bit of nuance. But I'd say it's the best of both worlds, because again, one of my favorite things is the serenity prayer, right? If you're familiar with that, grant me the serenity to accept the things I can, the courage to change the things, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so I feel like this whole tool is extremely helpful with that, because it's, let me accept, okay, so I have a tendency for whatever, right? A high metabolic rate, or a tendency to need more calcium. I can accept that that's just the way I am. But then I can have the courage to know, you know what? I can make this better. I can make a difference here, right? I can maybe I can take more calcium and K2 and I can be okay, or maybe I can do this and it's going to help me. I'm not stuck that way. And so I'd say that's what we're hoping to provide as wisdom, and that's why a little symbol here, I don't know if you can see it, is a little caduceus, which was the not only the symbol of healing and medicine, but also the symbol of wisdom, going back to ancient Egypt. So we want to give everyone, and that's why it's called genetic insights, that insight to be able to wisely make choices, not from like blank slates, I can do whatever kind of thing, but also not from, oh, I'm stuck with the way I am, like understanding the limitations we have. And also, I mean, a lot of the time we focus on limitations, but it's also great to find out a lot of the things we've got going for us, like a lot of the things that are good. We tend to sort everything by risk. That's one of the things we can do. And we tend to look at the high risk first, especially when people do a consult with me, because we want to use that time, with the stuff that's important. But it's also really great to just go through and go, all the genetic blessings that I've got. Oh wow, I have a tendency to be happy. I don't have any tendency for heart disease. My kidney and bladder are, very healthy genetically, whatever it might be, right? To just really give thanks and praise and appreciation for all the gifts we've been given as well.
Yeah. So Connie has a question, and it's a lot like a question I was going to ask. Connie says, confused on your website about what is the cost if you already have 23andMe. Also, I'm going to read her question and then ask you my question, and you can maybe get them together. Also, $65 is for something about hormones, but do we get a test that shows our personal hormone scan? So that's Connie's question. And I wanted to layer on the part about recommendations. We didn't really talk about that, but I'd like you to show what the recommendations look like when people get recommendations for some condition.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's just pick something at random to show you that. But yeah, let me ask the other question first. Thank you.
Yeah.
So basically, the way that it works is the $65 or whatever it is. You'll see if you hover over Genetic Insights. I don't know. Is it okay for me to maybe show them this just as an example?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually going to put the hormone health bundle in the comments here right now.
Okay, excellent.
People can see that.
Can you see my website right now, or is it still on the other screen? I'm not sure how it works.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Right now.
So yeah, under Genetic Insights, the first one is the All Access membership, and that gives you access to everything, like over 300 reports. For a lot of people, that's overwhelming. And so often we recommend you just start with something that's in an area that you're interested in first, like weight loss. We've talked about nutrition needs. That's going through all the nutrients like we talked about. emotional well-being. That's talking about that stuff that we talked about earlier, and hormonal balance. That's the one that I said is probably most appropriate. I didn't actually answer your question about hormones with the Kegel stuff. If you want to talk about that at some point,
we're maybe next time. We're getting to
okay.
an hour here, so it's easy to go down a lot of rabbit holes with this info. There's so much to talk about.
So basically, this is a collection that is just for the information. If you already have a 23andMe, that's all you need. You go to the cart and you get it. And then you will be sent a membership, and then you can log in. Now, once you go to checkout, it will say, do you need a DNA kit? And it says only need if you don't have access to your raw DNA file from another service. So if you have a 23andMe, if you Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, anything like that, you should be fine. You won't need it. You can just say skip, go to checkout, and you can upload it straight away. If you've never done any of those services before, then you will need that kit from us. Or you can buy it from someone else if you want, and then use it later. But, it's simpler to get it from us if you don't already have it. But either way, fine. It really makes no difference if you get it from us or someone else. So that's it in a nutshell. So all of these are for just the information. So it's $45, for instance. And then you can choose to add a DNA kit if you need it only. Oh, that makes sense. And then going back to, recommendations. Let's give an example of that from my...
And just to clarify too, that people, we have the link to the hormonal health report, but people, if they prefer, can choose, like you just showed, the oral health report. They can choose the weight loss report. There are other bundles they can choose from. Absolutely.
And I made sure that the discount code, which I provided for you guys, Kegel Queen, I think, will work for all of these. And if you are really into this and, you're fully, I want to give it a go, just like I was and like Alyce was, then you can go for the all access one at the top there. The discount code will even work for that one. But as I said, if you have a tendency at all to get overwhelmed or something, it's probably better to start with an area that you're really interested in, like hormones or weight loss or whatever it might be. So I just downloaded the sinus congestion reports. Are you able to see that as well with Zoom? Okay, excellent.
Pick that one. I'm curious about.
This is something that's plagued me my whole life. It's one of the first ones. Literally the other day, I was breathing in brick dust, and again, my sinus is congested right now. And as you'll see, so to begin with, there's just like a little introduction from me. Then it explains how it works, the science, if you're interested. Then it just explains, what the little symbols mean that you're going to see in a minute. Every recommendation is based on the scientific evidence, is scored based on the scientific evidence supporting it. And it's also scored based on the impact that it's likely to make. And so you can see.
I just want to underscore that for a second, that I love that the recommendations, they run the range from, ones that have had like a lot of really high quality randomized controlled trial, like gold standard research, are at the top. And then it gets a lower score if it's less, not as many studies, or, that I really like that they were rated that way.
Awesome. Yeah. And, we give the links to the study as well for those inclined towards that. So you can see for me, as I said, I've had sinus problems my whole life. If I become unwell in any way, that's like the first thing to go wrong usually. And not every report has this, but you can see for me, I'm 99th percentile. So that means in a room of 100 people, I would be the most likely to have sinus issues. And so true, been true my whole life. And so, as I said, it's crazy to see that and go, okay. And I used to smoke. So I didn't follow any of these recommendations when I was young.
I'm sure.
Yeah, that was very stupid of me. So, it gives an explanation about it. It can see here, it tells you the individual genes and SNPs. So if you do not want to take it on faith, if you're skeptical, you're very welcome. You can look up and Google every single one of these and fact check us, feel free. And then it gives the recommendation. So the first one for this one, for me, is nasal cleaning. High level of impact, high level of evidence about its effectiveness. This is something I do. I use a spray with xylitol in and salt and find it very effective. So that is the number one thing that helps me. And so that's number one there. Next one is avoiding cigarette smoke. Next one is doing an elimination diet, because obviously a lot of the time sinus issues are caused by a immune system reaction to some kind of food intolerance, dairy being a common one, but it could be a lot of different things. Next one is acupuncture. I have found that to be effective as well. I will agree with that. And so now we get to the first kind of supplement-y kind of recommendation. This is a herb. And so it tells you there's a study for this amount per day for this many days that worked.
I want to point out too, I just sent email a few days ago with a kind of a rant about how I hate when people use common names, but I noticed they use botanical names in there as well. The scientific name of all the herbs is in there.
Absolutely.
So, happy to see that.
And bromelain, which is becoming big at the moment because helps with spike protein, which a lot of people are worried about. So bromelain and nattokinase are big for that. So also recommended here for the sinuses. It's a pineapple, and it's an extract from pineapple. So if you don't like supplements, you could just eat pineapple to get the same benefit. And so, yeah, those are the recommendations. And so that's kind of, usually it's lifestyle things first, exercise and maybe don't do this, right? Reduce this toxic exposure that comes off often, eat this kind of food, maybe avoid this kind of food. And then often nearer the bottom, it might be more like, the odd supplement or two, but certainly not always. We're not trying to, push anything. And we do sell supplements on the Phil Younger store, but I'll tell you, most of the supplements we recommend, we don't sell at this stage. So, they are, and to be honest, we don't have any say. We can't say, oh, can you slip in, recommending this? No, this is 100% based on the work of several dozen scientists for our parent company, Omics Edge. So, that's what it looks like in a nutshell. I know I've breezed through quickly, but I know we're short on time.
Cool. So, Elwin, if you want to stop sharing, we have one more question from Nancy. And then I think we should probably let everybody go, because we could, as usual, with these, I always have the coolest, most interesting, smartest people as my guests here. And there's always so much more. Oops. Well, there's my camera gone out. So that's a sign.
Oh, okay.
But I'll be back in a different, here, I just have to modify what I'm doing here on my screen.
Okay.
Hi, I'm back with a different camera. So anyway, Nancy is asking, I had genetic testing from Ambry Genetics for cancer risk. The results show no clinically significant variants. Does this give any input to the genetic insights process?
So, yeah, it's a great question. So that's a bit different. The type of test results that you can reuse here to tell you everything that you need to know is the ancestry services, like 23andMe, Ancestry, MyHeritage. There's a bunch of them, maybe a couple of dozen. And generally, any of those services, we can take that information, because the ancestry services are very broad. They test millions and millions of different SNPs. If you're being tested for a specific health issue, a lot of the time they just test a handful of genes. So that you will not be able to use that raw data and those results in our system, because they only tested a very, very small selection of genes. But if she's asking, is that like an example of how our service works? The answer is yes. Basically, what they would have done is they would have, taken a sample from you, and they would have maybe ApoE is one of the ones that we do as well, which is a potential predictor for cancer. We have to be careful of that because we're not medical doctors. So I'm sure that your medical practitioners were able to test other things. We're not allowed to give medical things largely. But it's the same basic process, but you would need some kind of ancestry results in order to use our service.
So she's got that, Nancy, saying years ago I did Ancestry DNA. So
perfect. Yeah.
Cool. Really, really interesting stuff, Elwin. I am so glad that we did this, and I'm really, it'll take me some time to sift through everything that I've gained from my own analysis and from, discussing it with you. But I really learned a lot, and it's been very, very interesting. So I really, really appreciate you being here. And I'm really excited to put this concept that's really quite new to me to show that to the folks here, because I bet most of them haven't thought about it a whole lot either.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And you really are on the cutting edge by sharing this. I believe this will be the future of not just medicine, but even, alternative natural health within 5 or 10 years. But right now, as you say, almost no one's heard of it. So you really are ahead of the curve. I really appreciate you being open to giving it a try and sharing, about your own results so freely. And, thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fascinating. So thanks so much for being here. And I hope you'll stop in the group the next couple of days and see if any more questions crop up. And
I definitely will.
Wonderful. Thank you. Take care. Thanks, everybody, for being here, too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching.